Many thanks for joining us. My name is Felicity Ezewuike, your host. The world's population, according to UN estimates, is now 8 billion, though it is hard to pinpoint exactly when we passed the actual milestone. Further predictions in the 2022 report shows that while the population in most regions will level out over the next 80 years, Africa's population is expected to rise sharply. Countries of sub-Saharan Africa are projected to contribute more than half of the increase anticipated through 2050. Now, long before this report, there had been growing concerns. For instance, in March 2018, the African Development Bank and its East and Northern African governors stressed the need for urgent measures to match the continent's growing population and youth unemployment, which they likened to a ticking time bomb. Much of the rhetoric around Africa's population growth has had a positive spin. Those who see the glass half full say, by itself, population growth will not determine whether we can achieve a sustainable future, but it will be a significant factor, one we can influence positively. In that sense, the world population passing 8 billion is an opportunity. On the flip side, we will need more of everything, with the population growth placing stress on food security, infrastructure, housing, freshwater availability, the environment, as well as transportation and governance. Our goal on One Slot today is to further understanding of the salient implications as well as the opportunities of Africa's population growth and how we can better prepare for the future. My guest today is Bunmi Makinwa, a specialist in management, communication and development. He is a former Africa Regional Director of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. He was Nigeria's candidate to the post of Executive Director of UNFPA in 2010. Bunmi has worked for Family Health International, for Program for Appropriate Technology for Health and World Health Organization. He is a former chairman and member of the advisory board of the Division of Social and Behavior Change Communications at Wits University in South Africa. He holds a master's in public administration from the Harvard University. Bunmi joins us now from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for giving us your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Felicity. It's a pleasure to be here.
There is a hashtag, 8 billion strong. The discourse, like I said in my introduction, around adding billion people to the world's population since 2011, there is a positive spin, heavy on it, really. Some economists argue that population growth is a good thing for the economy and for innovation. But it is more complicated than that, isn't it?
Oh, definitely it is. Population, if you look at the numbers and you take it from a micro level, you say the more, the merrier. And that sounds good, doesn't it? But it's much more than that. The more, just take a micro perspective. More poor people wouldn't make merry. More malnourished people wouldn't make for good growth. But if you have more people who are educated, if you have more people who are well-fed, you have a strong workforce. It's as simple as that. You can take it from a micro level and then extrapolate to a country and to a continent. In parts of the world, population is actually not growing. But in Africa, which is our main areas of interest, population is growing. Unfortunately, a lot of it is in the negative sense, malnourished, uneducated, unemployed people. That's not an asset. So the challenge is to create assets. Positive, to take the positive out of these population growth.
I'm hopeful we'll get some of that from you today. But before we get there, I want to circle back to the creation of the UN World Population Day as far back as 1989. The focus then, if I understand it, is the urgency to bring attention to our impending population crisis. Now, if you move from there, many countries in Africa were predicted to be inhospitable in no distant time. Today, as it stands, many parts of Africa are facing famine, drought. People are displaced from their homes because of some of these issues. What do you say that these occurrences across Africa is an affirmation that we are at that crisis level when it comes to the population growth?
No, you're right. When the first concerns about population started, and we're talking about way back even in the previous century, the forecast was that the way the world was growing, if it continued, the earth would be uninhabitable, and that the number of people in the world will overwhelm the resources of the earth. And therefore, we needed to take measures about reducing the number. As time went on, it culminated in 1994 in the International Conference on Population and Development, which was held in Cairo, where the world came together to make very important policy pronouncements on fertility, on population growth, on managing population as a resource. And since then, things have changed dramatically in some parts of the world, like I said earlier. Population in some parts of the world has reached a point when it is in the negative. What we call population growth is in the negative. Rather than grow, it is declining because they have more elderly people, older people than young people. However, in Africa, the situation is that we have high fertility, meaning that an average woman has many children, more than one, sometimes 3, 4, in some extreme cases, 6. We also have declining death rate. We are living longer. You see, that's a second point. If you combine those two, you have high population growth. And if you have high population growth, you have to begin to look at how do we make the best of that population. Unfortunately, the resources that are available in many of the countries that you have described have not been able to take care of the high population growth. You even have, in addition to that, the massive urbanization, people moving from rural, from villages to the cities, so that the cities are overwhelmed. The infrastructures in the cities cannot cope with the number of people there. Most African cities are overpopulated today. I don't know if I'm painting a very dire picture, very negative picture. Because even within that picture, there are a few places, a few countries in Africa where it is not as bad. And yes, I hope we get to talk about them too.
Yeah, we certainly would. You just took the question out of my mouth about the consequences of our, exponential population growth. Let's talk about preparedness. It's something that we've known was coming. It's not like it just came up on us. How would you assess our level of preparedness and actually working to address the population growth across Africa?
Okay, now that's a very good question. Take Nigeria, for instance. Our population is estimated at about 218 million, maybe 220 million, depends on where you look, as of today. Now, it's a good example of a country. It's one of the major 5 countries in Africa. And you have Nigeria, you have Ethiopia, you have Egypt, you have Tanzania, and you have Democratic Republic of Congo. The 5 major countries in Africa that are driving high population growth. In all of those countries that I've mentioned, perhaps Egypt may be an exception a bit, no matter what we do, the population growth is inexorable. You can't stop it. It is estimated that by 2050, for instance, Nigeria's population would have grown to about 400 million, and that Nigeria will become perhaps the 3rd most populated country in the world, coming after China and India. If it continues beyond 2050, the continuing population growth rate. Now, how do we manage this? I don't know if that was the question that you asked.
Okay, my question was our preparedness. How are we preparing? What actually is on the ground as regards working to address the growth? Because, like I said, it didn't just spring up on us. We've known that this was coming.
Well, you will be happy, Felicity, to know that most countries in Africa have population policies, including Nigeria, including Ethiopia, including the ones that I mentioned, Tanzania. They have population policies. When you look at those policies address this growth of population in a very serious way. One, high fertility rate is discouraged by asking for use of contraception to manage the number of births that each average family should have. It also addresses issues of ensuring that education is available for women. It's very important to manage population. We know for a fact that an educated woman is likely going to have a better quality of life, including manageable number of children. We're not talking about numbers because one could be okay for some people, two for others, maybe three for others. But it's not likely to have unmanageable number of children. So you have fertility through contraception control, you have education, and then you have high standard of living that can accompany a family. Therefore, whatever children or whatever population that country has can be managed. The converse is the case in many instances where the resources to ensure that women go to school are very limited. And women's education is not a privilege. Sorry, it's not a priority, but a privilege. And therefore, women don't have, even when they have education, they don't have the level of education that equips them to have a higher quality of life in many areas. So the policy that we have to manage population is not being translated into action. And let me say quickly, it is not just about the population policy. Many policies in African countries are good on paper, but not well implemented.
Not in implementation. I mean, that is exactly what the reality is. You took me a nudge further, though, so let's just explore this part of the conversation. There's a debate about behavioral nudges to help with the population growth. But before I talk about that, let's talk about the late former president of Tanzania, John Magufuli. In 2018, he told a public rally not to listen to advice. I'm going back to your question about women and their health and contraception. That foreigners advising us to take contraception have sinister motives. For good measures, he accused women who use birth control as being lazy because their job is to, have large number of children. I'm pointing to this particularly because this is a president of a country. So I want to find out from you, is this a pervading mindset among leaders in Africa? If that is true, what would be the implication for all of these policies and all of these efforts in trying to address population growth?
Yeah. President Magufuli, may his soul rest in peace.
Amen.
He was popularly known as the bulldozer in Tanzania because of the kind of policies that he championed and pushed. Very popular with some people and very, very disliked by others. He was a controversial figure. So saying that was not out of tune with his personality. That's who he was. And let me say quickly as well that President Magufuli was not the first person to express this kind of sentiment or make this kind of statement. There are other leaders who have made this kind of statement. You see, there's a notion by certain people that the higher the number of the people in an environment, and especially in a country, the more resources the country has to develop. Some of them even point to China as an example. That is not totally wrong. What is missing, though, is that the population itself, having a number of millions and millions of people, is not automatically a resource. It is potentially a resource. And as I said earlier, if you have malnourished people, if you have uneducated people, if you have people who have nowhere to live, they cannot be a resource. They can't constitute. In fact, it's like you said yourself, it's a social time bomb. Because young people who have nothing to do will find something to do. They say the devil finds work for an idle hand.
True.
They will become a menace to society. They will threaten the social fabric of society. So what President Magufuli was missing was that the number itself, is it manageable? Will you be able to take care of it? And let me just quickly recall a dialogue with a president of an East African country who expressed these sentiments directly to me and my colleagues. What we did was to come back to him after several months with an analysis using the data from their own National Statistics Office, showing how many children of school-bearing age were being produced every 5 years. Therefore, if you produce X number of children every 5 years, you need X number of classrooms for them to go to school, because he was also a champion of education. If you have all those classrooms, you need X number of teachers for them to be taught in school. And for the classrooms and for the teacher to be available, this is the budget just for elementary education that you should envisage in the next 10 to 15 years. This president, and this is an actual experience, he looked at the Minister of Education, he looked at the Minister of Health, who are there with him, and he said, are these people correct? I was then working for the United Nations Fund for Population. And he said, are these correct? Are these statistics correct? And the ministers nodded and said, yes, they are correct. He said, where are we going to get the money? We can't get this kind of money. And so we said, well, Mr. President, huge population may be good, but this is what you need to do to back up your own policies and make sure that you take care of them. I'm pleased to say that this country that I have given the example from took policy measures to begin to seriously address both taking care of the population and the expected population and making sure that they do not have a deluge of people that they will not have resources to cope with.
Fair enough. That is a win. However you look at it, that is a win, no matter how small it is. Let's stay with government. We'll talk about the Behavioral nudges later. Most governments in Africa talk about the problem of poverty alleviation. What the implication would be my question of higher population growth rates among the poor for their chances of overcoming absolute poverty. Because when you keep talking about poverty alleviation, there are still people in poverty. What are their chances? If our population continues to grow the way it is growing, what are their chances of getting away from absolute poverty?
Well, very good question. Very good question. If you want to eliminate poverty or even reduce it, how do you go about it? Again, you need to have quality lives for people. Quality lives in terms of development is basically good health, education for people, especially women, access to basic infrastructures or sanitation, like water to drink that is healthy, that will not kill them, people having access to move around, and security of life within the environment. Our resources in Africa, for most countries, are very limited. Even a rich country that produces oil, Angola, Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, have huge number of poor people. If you are going to alleviate poverty among the population that we have right now, not to mention the increased population that will happen, the challenge is huge. And the resources available in the world are not increasing. Seriously, they are not increasing.
But let's flip the coin. Sorry to interrupt you. Let's look at those that are spinning the positive dice. The positive dice is our population growth is a plus for the continent. So where do you think they're getting that drive to say? Because most of the predictions, most of the projections show that we're in dire strait, but people think otherwise. So where are they getting that positive energy for? Is there any glimmer that we could actually improve? Government across Africa could possibly improve the lives of people despite these projected growths?
I would say that a number of governments, and many of them, actually aim to improve the quality of life of people. It's a campaign message that they have, and it's it's a very good intention that they try to implement. But let me also say that a lot of them are overwhelmed by this number. It is not just having many people, because you can have many people, and if the quality of life and the access to basic means of existence are available, the access is there, if the amenities are available, then it is not going to be a big problem. Where are they getting the message that they can eliminate poverty or that they can improve quality of lives of people when you have so many people that are not covered through the social network, social net of having basic amenities? It's not going to work. It's not going to be possible. So what are you going to do then? You can't even decrease the population growth in a country like Nigeria today. You can't decrease it. So we need to see what is the minimum requirement that will be needed for an average Nigerian, no matter where you live. Do we have the means to put this in place? And we should strive to do it, no matter how difficult
it is.
Because if we don't, the problems are many. And let me say quickly, you see why the burden for African countries is huge. It's especially because the population we are talking about are young people.
True.
Young people will go through certain steps in life. And therefore, there will be a lot of reproduction and a lot more people that young people will bring to bear. Secondly, young people have energy, they have hope, they really want to do something. They are restless. You cannot just keep them under.
Well, definitely. I've actually scheduled a part, the last part of this conversation for us to explore that conversation a lot more. I'm hoping that I can manage the time properly. But for now, let's go on a very short break. So much to look at. We will review options to harness Africa's population potentials after this break. And when we come back from that again, we're going to look at the young people and leadership. Stay with us. Good to know you're still with us. We're still here on One Slot looking at 8 billion world population. I still have Bunmi Makinwa speaking with us. We're just looking at it. Let me reference something you said about the population growth, that it might be a bit difficult to control it, but the predictions, the projections all seems gloomy. Should there be efforts at population reduction? If yes, how ethical would that be?
Yeah, thank you very much, Felicity. Population reduction carries a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. How to reduce population is actually not something that is likely to promote human rights. And it's not even sustainable, nor will it lead to development. What we need to do is to manage population. Manage population by encouraging decline in fertility, by encouraging people to have fewer children so that they can make the decisions on what number of children they can take care of, they can manage, and also making sure that those who are there, the young people, have quality life. Access to education, access to health, and access to good and sustainable livelihood. So that when they need it, they can be employed or they can employ others and all of that. We know for a fact that using force or using coercive methods to force people to reduce the number of children does not work. It's not useful. It's not encouraged. And I will not personally support it. Because when people have children, a lot of factors are involved. Some of them are cultural, some of them are religious, some of them are tradition, and all of that. If we need to affect those factors, if we can change those factors and make them more favorable, people will make better decisions. So people need to be able to make good decisions. And we know for a fact, we have so many countries in the world where population has been managed. So it is not impossible. It can be done.
Okay, but what you're referencing now is the behavioral nudges that we are going to use to try and manage our population? Again, there is a debate around why the need for incentives, why we need to, show people another way. If it is your culture to have children, why should we try to encourage you to change your mind? Because on the one hand, we encourage that we grow our culture. It's African to celebrate our culture. And one of them is to have many children. So that puts you in a difficult position, actually. Let me hear what you have to say.
Yes, it's very good to have many children. First of all, it's good to have children. It's good to have many children. You see, the reality is what? If you have a conversation similar to the one I explained with the president, which is at a national level, it's the same conversation at a micro level. You give examples around us. Every family can give examples. Take somebody whose income is so low that he and the wife, as a family, are barely able to manage their own existence. Do they want to bring children to the world to suffer? Do they want to bring children to the world to live the kind of life, the tough life that they as a family live? Or do they want children, as they say in many of our cultures, that will be better than their parents? If they are going to be better than their parents, then what do they need to get there? Does the family, the father and mother, have the means to make sure the children will get there? You see, this kind of conversation is what takes people to make a decision, an informed decision. But more than that, they need also to be equipped with the means. Because if people say, I want to have only 2 children, but they do not know that there's a way to prevent getting pregnant or managing that process, if they don't know, or they don't know how to get it or where to get it, it's useless to make a decision that you want to have 2 children. So it has to be a choice that is informed in the sense that they have the means, access to being able to have that control over what they do and how many children they will then have. So they will be culturally appropriate. They will be doing the right thing for their culture by bringing children who will have better quality of life and who will be able to be joy to their parents. And that's the ultimate. That's where we have to go. Not just telling people, have X number of children, don't have too many children. No.
This is a part of the conversation. Yes. No, I was going to say this is a part of the conversation that a lot of people, are sort of divided about. Who should be championing this? Who should be convincing who in order for us to champion the need for us to adjust our behaviors and educate people on their sexual rights and contraception and all of that?
Yes, you see, the most important lever for change at a serious level, at a very high level, is policy. We need to have the right policy. And secondly, we need to implement it. Because if you, Felicity, talk to your nephew or your aunt, and he or she changes, is that going to change a lot in the community? Maybe not. Even if I talk to my niece, and she says, oh, I will not have 5 children, I will have 2. But if we want real change to happen, it has to be at a bigger level. So who has the means to convince people? First of all, it has to be the government. And I don't mean government at Abuja level for Nigeria or Nairobi level for Kenya. Government at every level. The means of education. We have to look at our educational system, for instance. Should we begin to educate people on fertility, birth rate, access to infrastructure, the limitations of resources, and therefore what a family should look like? If that is part of the educational culture, educational system, it will have a lot more effect and lead to the kind of change that we are looking for, rather than the micro one. I'm not saying that that's the only level, at government level, state level, local government level, and having the means so that when people want contraceptives, when they want to know what contraception to use, they should be able to go to the next clinic or go to a community center or go to a hospital nearby.
And there will be no stigma attached to you going to these places.
Thank you very much. Everybody should feel free. A 19-year-old who doesn't want to get pregnant should be able to go to a community center. A woman who has 3 children and says, I would like to stop having children, should be able to have access to the means to be able to stop after the dialogue with the husband. This access should be there and easy. She doesn't have to travel to the capital to be able to get that access, because many people will not have the means to do it.
Okay. Let's look at another angle to this conversation. Analysts say projections are not set in stone. They say the UN projections may not account for many variables that could affect the population growth rate. Do you agree with this? If you do, what are these variables that could influence, change the curve and bring it downwards, maybe?
Well, I'm trying to, frankly, internalize that question in a way that I can reason with you. If what people have in mind is that some of the variables are, for instance, look at what is popularly known now as in Nigeria as Paja, or is it Japa?
Japa, to move out of the country, Japa.
Of the country.
Yes.
Japa, thank you. And that is happening. I'm sorry, I'm not so hip.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. In many countries in Africa, you have the same outflow of young people looking for better life in other countries of the world, especially in the countries of the North. Some of this is being seen negatively, but again, there's a positive spin to it. In many of those countries, they do need manpower, meaning human power. They need young people who can help their economy to grow. They need young people who can help their systems to work. So our young people who are living are assets in other places. But there is a downside to it. Many of the educated people, look at the rate at which doctors leave African countries after their training, nurses, health workers. That is not an asset for the countries that they leave after the training, but it's an asset for other countries. So, in a way, the free flow of people across the world can also help to mitigate some of the problems of population growth. Because there are other parts of the world where they are having population decline, not growth. So they need more people. Some places in the world are actively inviting people to come and live in their countries. But they are very choosy. They choose the kinds of people that will serve their economy and their social settings. So that is it. So there are some variables that may help to mitigate the problems.
Okay.
However, in many poor countries in Africa, we have to do a lot to reduce the problems that population growth causes to our society.
So let's
we
stay
also
with
have the additional issues around climate change, which means more people, declining resources, declining the means that we have to sustain life, and therefore attendant problems.
Okay, let's stay. I think you brought in other variables of climate and climate change. But I want you to take those two variables now and maybe look at how international community or governments can harness these variables in such a way that it will positively impact our efforts at managing population growth. You talked about the job. You've actually said the solutions in when you said they pick people for lower populated areas. But holistically, how can governments and international community come in and harness these variables in a way that it will make a real dent in our efforts to manage population?
The whole idea of what is called demographic diversity comes to play. See, demographic diversity is where you have population, which is regular in many parts of the world, with various capabilities. The laws of comparative advantage will come in. You have a situation where some countries have more of some kinds of population than they need, and some countries have less, like I was trying to explain. So what will happen is, if there are conversations or discussions between countries. There could be bilateral agreement on how people move so that it is organized rather than desperate movement, disorganized movement, and therefore a lot of suffering or problems that accompany those. So that's one way there could be agreement on how people move. It's almost like it's a one-track exchange because you don't get as many people flowing in the other direction, but there is that. The other point is making sure that people are educated in ways that they can be useful. I mean, 70% of the people in Africa overall are below the age of 30. Below the age of 30. And that's why the population growth is just unrelenting. It will continue. Now, what do you do with that population? They have to be skilled. They have to be employable. So, what variable can you use? What kind of incentive? How do you get people to be employed and employable? The training that you give them should be such that they can get into the labor market. And not only the labor market of the country where they are born or where they are raised, they can be useful for the labor market of other countries. I mean, you see, some countries in the world have more people coming from outside and living there and working there than their own locals. You can take Qatar. You can take some of the Emirates. They have more people from outside, but it is organized. I hope this responds in some ways to
yes, it certainly does.
Issue.
You actually answered it. While I was framing the question, I realized that you've actually answered it when you talked about, people from low populated areas going there. I think this is a good point for us to take a quick breather. When we come back, leadership and Africa's youth labor force will be the focus. Please don't go away. Thank you for staying with us. But I just want to ask you straight up, how can African countries optimally harness the vast increases in the labor force over the coming decades if we are to enhance productivity? Before we went on that break, you talked about the fact that we have more young population and we're not going to stop growing. What do we do with it?
Just to make the point straight ahead, one is we need to make sure our young people are employable, making sure that they are fit for the market. The market is changing rapidly. A lot of our educational institutions are still training people in the traditional ways. That's unfortunate because many of them go into the market unprepared. Many young people are unprepared for the market. They don't have the kind of relevant experience or training and preparation that is needed for them to serve in the labor market. So that's a major change that we have to make. Okay. We also have to make the change and understand that employment today is changing. Making people, preparing people to seek employment is not bad, but preparing people to be able to be self-employed is going to be even more worthwhile. So that education is partly necessary, but partly practical. When you look at today, you look at many of the people who are working as maybe graduates in some of the cities doing the traditional work, compare them with those who did not even go to school, who decided to be, let's say, mechanics, electricians, and maybe tilers and so on. You will be surprised that the ones who did not go to school are earning much more through their own direct labor than those who went to school and earning salaries. So if we can combine the two and make sure that the technicians or the artisans are educated, then we have much, much more to gain. So that's one way.
In the interest of time, I have to interject because there's another area that I really want you to speak extensively on, and that is leadership. In every discussion about development, leadership is key. Africa is a continent that even today is governed by mostly old people, while the young population continues to grow. In the upcoming elections in Nigeria, for instance, some of the candidates are over 70 and have been around for quite a while. We have seen the rise of youth-led movements across the continent, a trend that I and a lot of Nigerians think will continue as the climate exacerbates. I mean, the economic crisis and all of that. What actions do you think are needed now to check a negative spiral? Because you said if you don't have a positive channel for your energy, something else will take it.
For sure. Now, I am of no doubt in my mind that young people should run our governments. No doubt in my mind. Young people should be in position of leadership. Let me make the arguments against that myself. One of them is, oh, they have no experience. Oh, they are not ready. Oh, they don't know how to do it. Oh, we went through the ropes before we got to where we are. I don't buy any of those arguments. You did not look at people who are running governments in many parts of Africa, many countries. Many of them started at the age of 20-something, 30-something, being leaders, being governors, being senators. 50 years later, they are still running their affairs. Something is wrong, seriously wrong. Did they always get it right? These people who claim to be leaders today? No. Let these young people get in, let them make the mistakes, and then correct those mistakes and make sure that they can improve as time goes on. I do not in any way expect that when young people take over, it's going to be milk and honey. Everything will be fine. No. But let's continue. Let's have them solve the problems, because we are 70% of the population is young people below the age of 30. It is wrong to have these 70, 80-year-olds, or even people like me, making decisions for them. They are the future. We talk about sustainable development. We're looking at Agenda 2030. It is their agenda. The future belongs to them. If they don't get it right, they will find the problems where they have parked them. So, in summary, let us have young people running more and more the affairs of country, the affairs of companies as leaders.
Okay, you've used it in the course of this conversation, the population policy. So my question would be, how do we go about getting a viable population policy that is integral to individual countries that will help our growth? First off, just to help us as quickly as you can, what is a population policy and how will it impact Africa's population growth?
Yes, a population policy is a set of documents that set out what the problems are, that's putting it in a very short form, what the problems are and what the solutions should be, based on a lot of studies and experience and issues that are brought together. That's a policy. The next thing when you have a policy is the implementation of that policy. In many of our countries, as I said earlier, the policy is not what is lacking, it is the implementation. The resources to make them happen are not there. When I say resources, I mean that in the broad sense, not just money or materials, but the kind of human beings who we make sure that they get results. They are not put there. People are not put in positions where they are capable and they are eager to make sure that things work.
All right, your final thoughts on the conversation of Africa in the context of a world where we have 8 billion people. In 40 seconds, if you can. I'm told we're out of time.
Yes, we have a challenge to make sure that our population become an asset for us. It is possible. It is possible because they are young people. Young people, they are tremendous assets, but they need to have quality life. They need to have the right education. They need to have the right situation of health. They can do wonders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bunmi Makinwa, for speaking with us and sharing your expertise over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicity. It's been really, really nice talking with you.
Same here. All right, my conversation with Bunmi today has re-highlighted for me how important it is to frame Africa's population issue, not simply in terms of numbers or densities or rates or movements, but with full consideration of the qualities of human life. It is fair to say that if we work to make population trends favorable, it will open our options and enlarge our chances of positive growth. I am confident that with the number of qualified Africans today who have received education and practical work exposure in some of the world's best institutions and corporations, we surely have what it takes, not only to imagine, but to begin to shape the Africa we all want to see. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Let's do this again next week. Thank you very much for watching.